You ever have one of those moments when time slows down and you realize this is it? The moment that changes everything. Yeah, that was me. Sitting at the dinner table, staring at my wife across the candlelit setting as she smirked, dropping a bomb in front of our family like it was nothing. It was my son's 18th birthday. A quiet dinner at his favorite steakhouse. Just me, him, my wife, and her sister. I should have known something was off when my wife insisted on inviting her. Those two always had this strange, unspoken bond, like they were above everyone else. Especially me. Especially my son. Still, I tried to push it aside, focusing on my kid. He was a good kid, quiet, maybe a little lost, but kind. Never got into trouble, never asked for much. Tonight was supposed to be about him. About celebrating his milestone. Instead, my wife, his own mother, lifted her wine glass, tapped it with a spoon, and made an announcement. "I just want to say I made an important decision," she said, nodding toward her sister, who was already grinning. "My nephew is going to need that college fund, and I've decided to give it to him." Silence. Blinked. My son blinked. And then, as if she hadn't just shattered something between us, she smirked. "Your failure of a son would just waste it anyway." My son looked down at his plate. Her sister, because of course had to add her 2 cents, just shrugged. Of course my child deserves it more. And that was when something inside me clicked. Chuckled. Funny. Funny how they thought they had a say in this. Funny how they assumed I was the fool in this story. Funny because the tuition was already paid. Let me backtrack a little. I knew my wife and I weren't in the best place. The past few years had been strained. She used to look at me with love, or at least something close to it. But lately, there was nothing behind her eyes except mild irritation, like I was some inconvenience she tolerated. And when it came to our son, she was even worse. Cold. Dismissive. Like he wasn't hers. First I made excuses. She was stressed. Work was getting to her. Maybe she just didn't know how to connect with him. But the truth was uglier. She resented him. He wasn't some perfect, overachieving golden boy like her nephew. He was just himself. And in her eyes, that wasn't enough. I noticed the way she spoke about him, like he was a disappointment before he even had a chance to be anything else. The way she lit up when she mentioned her nephew but barely acknowledged her own son. And I noticed something else too. She started getting curious about his college fund. Asking little questions here and there. How much did we save again? It's in a joint account, right? Like an idiot, I pretended not to see where this was going. Until tonight. Until she made her grand announcement. Until she tried to humiliate my son on his night. And that was her mistake. I took a sip of my drink, set it down, and exhaled slowly. Then I laughed again. "What's so funny?" my wife snapped. I tilted my head, looking at her, then at her sister, then at my son, who still hadn't lifted his eyes from his plate. "You actually think you have control over that money?" said. That got her attention. Her face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about? We've always had a joint account for it." "No," I cut in. "We had a joint account. Past tense. I moved the money months ago. Paid his tuition up front. In full." Her smirk vanished. Her sister's jaw clenched. My son. His eyes finally lifted. Wait. Disbelieving. Hopeful. My wife's voice was sharp. "You did what?" "I paid for our son's education. Because, unlike you, I believe in him." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "And unlike you, I'm his parent first. Not someone else's wallet." Her face flushed red. Then came the scream. "You had no right." "Oh, but I did." And watching her lose it in the middle of a fancy restaurant, with everyone staring. That was worth every penny. She stormed out. Her sister followed, hissing something under her breath, but I wasn't listening anymore. Instead, I looked at my son. For the first time that night, he looked at me. "You really did that?" he asked quietly. He nodded. "I really did that." He swallowed hard, his hands shaking a little. Then, in the smallest voice, like he didn't quite believe it, he said, "Thank you. I hadn't heard that kind of emotion from him in years. And that meant more to me than anything. The divorce papers came a week later. No surprise there. What did surprise me, though, was how light I felt. Like I could breathe again. Like I wasn't living in a house full of resentment and quiet disdain. She fought, of course. Tried to take half of everything. But that money, that was protected. Locked in my son's name. Untouched. She called me names. Called me a fool. But I'd rather be a fool who stood by his son than a coward who let him down. And my son. He's in college now. Figuring himself out. Thriving. The last time we spoke, he said something that stuck with me. You know, Dad. I really thought you didn't see me. But you did, didn't you? I saw him. And I always will.